session, as we are pinching for time, disaster management and climate readiness of utilities. Electric utilities worldwide face significant disruptions due to climate change, including cyclones, floods, fires, droughts, earthquakes, and tsunamis. With more frequent and intense extreme weather events and rising temperatures, the resilience of utility services, including electricity distribution, is under scrutiny. Climate change is an immediate reality requiring proactive measures to protect critical infrastructure and ensure uninterrupted service. This session focuses on disaster management and climate readiness in the utilities sector, recognizing the multifaceted challenges utilities encounter. It emphasizes strategic planning, innovation, and collaboration to effectively address these issues. The session provides a comprehensive exploration of disaster management and climate readiness for electric utilities with widespread assets. It highlights the needs for forward-thinking approaches, including equipment standards, infrastructure improvements, advanced forecasting, collaboration, and strategic investments to prepare the climate-related threats and maintain reliable services for customers. The discussion points of the session would be equipment standard for changing weather patterns, infrastructure redesign for flood protection, cyclone-resistant pole and tower designs, undergrounding distribution lines, advanced weather forecasting and emergency plans, collaboration and resource sharing, investment in emergency equipment and reserves. May I take the privilege of calling Mr. Ravi Sitapati to chair and moderate this session. Please put your hands together for Mr. Ravi Sitapati, ISGF, WG Chair and GSEF Ambassador for the Americas. Please put your hands together to welcome sir. The theme presentation is by Killian McKenna, Senior Research Engineer, National Renewable Energy Laboratory. For the special address, we have Nikunja Bihari Dal, CEO, Odisha Election Department, and former Additional Chief Secretary Energy, Government of Odisha, on video. May I invite Amit Tripathi, Advisor Power Sector, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Welcome, sir. May I invite Mr. R.R. Mehta, former MD Reliance Infrastructure. Last person. Mr. Saloni Goel, may I invite you onto the stage, Director Projects and ESG Religare Enterprises Limited. May I invite upon Mr. Rajkumar Rastogi, Chief of Operations, TP Central Odisha Distribution Limited. Let me invite Ashutosh Sharmaji, Senior Principal Consultant and Team Lead, Grid Asset Management and Studies, DNV, Semela. Is it Semela, sir? Semela. Okay. I think sir would give you the expansion of the abbreviation. May I also ask Ms. Vaishali Sagar to join us on stage, Lead Startups and Sustainability Charter Amazon Web Series. Please put your hands together for Ms. Vaishali Sagar. Mr. Ravi, sir, we are starting at 12:40. I hope we can do justice to some time.
I'm not sure I can bat 100 every time, so this time We're starting almost 40 minutes late, right? So 1 hour, sorry, 1 hour, 10 minutes, sorry, yeah. So anyway, we'll try our best to catch up. If there is an incentive, if RENA can give an incentive, I will announce that so that then we can close on time. No, lunch, miss. Okay. You're a brave person. What do you want? I have no presentations, but anyways, most of the panelists have presentation. Just as opening remark, I thought, this is a subject that I've been requesting Mr. Reji Pillai to keep at it every event. And we began that at ISUW, I think a year and a half ago, repeated it in Bhubaneswar, repeated it again in Delhi, and now again we are repeating. And why? Simply because I don't think enough of work is being done in this area, even after having suffered various damages. In North America, for example, we go through hurricanes, floods, whole lot of issues. And you would think we would have learned a lesson, right? We are still learning. So billions and billions of dollars in damages, the huge amount of inconvenience to people. Electricity today is being used for everything, including healthcare. And yet we are saying, oh, we can't do anything because it's just natural calamities. I don't think that's the right answer at all. We need to do something. So I'll give you just 2 examples and I'll stop. And then the rest of the panels may want to continue. One, for example, has been the question of how do you manage the thermal properties of electrical equipment? They were purchased 60, 70 years ago. They were to older standards, and Reji mentioned that yesterday, to 40 degrees. Today our ambient has gone up. Our variability on load, thanks to renewable energy, is also going up and down. And so our belief is that thermal management of electrical equipment will become a prime and not just amps. Right now we are managing it to amps. We should be managing it to degrees centigrade. Internal temperature, outside temperature, etc., etc. So there are 2 or 3 technologies we have developed for transformer OEMs, for cable OEMs and others, whereby we believe that this can come on. So you will actually input temperatures into SCADA, as opposed to just saying, let's input only current and voltages into SCADA. The second is undergrounding, and that has tremendous benefits. So we are working on a project where we have lowered the cost of undergrounding for PG&E, for example. So the key question is, how do we work with stakeholders to reduce the cost? Because typically there was a reason why those costs were higher, but with new technologies we should be able to lower the cost to the extent possible. And then if it still makes a business case, it makes a business case. But what we cannot do is to just say, oh, we'll just keep on replacing the poles and wires as it was to older standards, hoping that the next cyclone will not come. And that, I think, is just very unfortunate that we are seeing it like that in many, many cases. EPRI has done some good work on the cross arms, for example. But even then, it just doesn't cut it. When you have a cyclone, you have a huge swath of damage. And that means 2 things. You've lost the assets on the balance sheet of the utilities, and you've lost the revenue because you couldn't sell power. So given the fact that utilities are highly leveraged by design, you got a problem if you don't manage your assets well or if you don't mitigate some of these risks well. So with that, let me just sort of stop, and I will ask each of the panelists here to speak. They all have a presentation. There's a themed speaker here, so he gets a little more, and that's you, Killian. The rest of them get 5 minutes each. And again, my usual warning, when I get up, it means you have 1 minute, and please don't make me come towards you. So that's the last, right? So with that, let me ask Killian to come and take the stage.
And I completely agree, the criticality of this subject is not getting the attention it deserves, because it's critical for utilities, it's critical for people, and ultimately we're also talking about people's livelihoods and their lives in a lot of conditions for some of the kind of extreme weather events that we're seeing. Hopefully the folks can bring up slides shortly. But just to give you an overview, the kind of pieces that we're talking about are, we are talking about threats from extreme weather and threats from climate. We're talking about the vulnerabilities of the power system to those threats. We're talking about the consequences in terms of what are the outages that we're going to experience, what is the damage to equipment, and what is the mitigation that we can start looking at in terms of utility investment in resilience, utility investments in reliability, And yeah, so those are kind of the major themes, and that's how we should be thinking about this from a utility perspective, and kind of modeling each of those elements. In the US, for a lot of those threats, we're talking about extreme weather in terms of hurricane events, in terms of wildfires. There's been, if you've been following some of the recent wildfire events in California, there's been a lot of situations where utility equipment can be, responsible for starting wildfires. So it's not just being resilient to extreme weather events, but it's also being responsive to. So if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so again, threats, mitigation, consequence, and vulnerability are kind of how utilities need to start thinking about these events and start thinking about the probabilities of each of these events. If we can go to the next slide. So what we're seeing with climate change is both an increased frequency and magnitude of extreme weather events. If we are looking at the US, and what you're seeing there in that kind of top graphic is the increase in magnitude of billion-dollar events in terms of the cost to recovery, the cost to infrastructure. And those are increasing across nearly every aspect of extreme weather. The US is seeing increases in severe storms, winter storms, cyclones, wildfires that have caused widespread destruction of grid assets and outages. If you're looking at the bottom graphic here, that's separating SAIDI from major event days and then kind of without major event days. So we need to start thinking about reliability and resilience in terms of branching out those two different topic areas. Yeah. Oh, okay. Great. Wonderful, thank you. In terms of India, the audience here knows the risks a lot better than I do, but cyclones and flooding are obviously of concern. One area that I think is hugely misunderstood or not studied enough is the risk of wildfires. We're seeing that there's going to be droughts. Yep, sorry. Okay, we're seeing that there's going to be increasing droughts all over the world. So we're looking at, more dry scrub, more dry forest. What is the risk from wildfires and potential utility equipment starting wildfires? One of the critical pieces is heat events. We know that the ambient temperature is going to increase, as Ravi was saying. So what is the impact on distribution assets? What's the impact on thermal loading? And that's twofold. One is we're going to have an increased ambient temperature, which increases the thermal loading. Secondly, with that increased ambient temperature, we're going to have an increase in the adoption of HVAC. We're going to have a decrease in the demand factor from HVAC units. So that's going to increase or exacerbate the thermal loading. And we've already seen in the US heat events causing failures of transformers. So this is something that we're going to be looking at more. And we've got to remember the grid equipment that we install today is going to be around for the next 30, 40, 60 plus years. We have instances in the US where, and this is the world over, where there's substations that are over 90 years old. So we need to be designing this equipment with heat in mind, with raises in temperature, with extreme weather events to really be thinking about this. The other part that I'd want to emphasize, and Ravi, you talked a little bit about the cost in terms of the utility, but there's a huge human cost to this as well. When we're talking about extreme heat events, that is when the grid needs to be at its most reliable. If not, we don't have safe spaces for people in terms of like thermal islands in cities where we're going to have really hot temperatures. And then we're talking about mortality rates. And we've already been seeing this all over the world. We've seen it in Europe, we've seen it in the US, where we don't have appropriate heating and cooling now, but if the grid is failing during those events, we're talking about people's lives. In the US, we've already seen this. If you're looking at Winter Storm Uri in Texas, there's still estimates and debate around what the exact number is, but there is potentially 200 people who lost their lives because of load shedding from that event. So this is critical. When we're talking about resilience and reliability investments, we need to be looking at the different types of customers and the cost of unserved energy, which also includes human life impact. So making strategic resilience investments according to the types of customers, whether we're talking about hospitals, communication towers, sanitation and pumping facilities, we need to be targeting resilience investments around those. We also need to remember that the duration of an outage does not have the same cost impact or the same health impact for customers. Long duration outages have huge cost impacts and health impacts for customers as well. So that's something of critical importance. When we're talking about resiliency and reliability, we need to kind of delineate what we mean there. Resiliency is a response to extreme events and to major event days. Reliability is something that as an industry we're reasonably good at and pretty familiar with. But resiliency, we need to be changing the way that we think about it. We need to be thinking about anticipation of extreme events, absorption of how the utility or the system can respond to that, how it can withstand, and what's a recovery. Which in this presentation, I deal less on the recovery side, less on the response in terms of like transformer or different asset programs for utilities in terms of emergency response crews. But shared resources across utilities and shared assets is critical to the success of responding to these events. In terms of the planning components, we need to be looking at different hazards. We need to be looking at the network health and the resilience of the network to respond to those, looking at different performance metrics in terms of over time, how are we doing as a power system, as a utility, looking at threat risk analysis. The threats that are here today are not going to be the threats that are going to be here in 10, 20, 30 years' time. We need to be bringing these into our investment cycles so that we're putting assets in today that can withstand these extreme events in the future, and looking at prioritization of those investments so that resiliency is a very expensive thing. The consequences are also expensive. So this is where we need to start bringing in communities to understand the cost of these resiliency investments are very, very high, but the cost of not doing it is equally high. When we're looking at threat risk analysis, we need to be breaking down from historical analysis, which is not adequate for the future, not adequate for climate change, to looking at forward-looking scenario analysis in terms of how are extreme events going to increase, what is going to happen to temperature, and then we can bring into this in terms of what are the probability of events, what is the vulnerability of the system, what are the consequences of not being able to respond. There's no one-size-fits-all for utility investments. It depends on your area, it depends on local weather conditions, it depends on your vulnerability to different threats in terms of flooding, in terms of cyclones, in terms of extreme weather and high wind events, in terms of wildfire risk. So we're seeing a variety of different investments in the US depending on what they're targeting. Whether we talk about some of the utilities on the East Coast where inundation was a problem, Con Edison did a lot of investment on submersible substations after Hurricane Sandy. Some of the utilities in the western part of the US are more looking at wildfires in terms of moving from pole mount oil field transformers to dry type. And then we've got a lot of move to undergrounding, both for wildfires, but also for hurricane events. So there's a lot of different pieces here, and the cost element is high. So that's where this prioritization comes in. At NREL, we're increasingly trying to catch up in this space, which I think everyone is. And we've got a number of tools, some of which are open source, that I encourage people to look at in terms of, we have a new development on ERAD that's kind of looking at what are the areas of the distribution system that are resilient to these events, how do we keep critical infrastructure energized. REOPT is looking at how can we use DERs and solar and storage to provide behind the meter resiliency. We've got a platform called ARES, which is megawatt and multi-megawatt testing for resiliency and microgrids. And then we've got another tool, Cadet, which is looking at capacity expansion decisions and for distribution utilities in order to figure out where do we need to make strategic investment and how can we do this hazard threat vulnerability type analysis. So in summary, the magnitude and frequency of extreme weather events is increasing. Temperatures are increasing. We need to be looking at planning on the 20, 30, 40, 60-year horizon. The probability, we need to be looking at probability of events, the vulnerability of the system, the consequence of failure. And resilience is expensive, but the consequences are equally high. We need to be thinking about all of this and bringing communities to help them understand why are we looking at this and why we are making these type of investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalyan, for keeping the time, so you set the tone for everybody else. We were looking towards a special address by video link by Mr. Nikunja Bihari Dal, but apparently that video link is not live as yet. So let us move to the rest of our speakers, and if he should become ready, then I may interrupt and then we'll continue again. So let me invite Amit Tripathi here to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. We were supposed to start at good morning. I think it's good afternoon. So my name is Amit Tripathi. I'm advisor power sector for CDRI. For the benefit of the audience, CDRI is the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Next slide, please. So CDRI was formed and launched by Honorable Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, at UN Climate Action Summit. and which is primarily with the focus of, with respect to the disaster and climate risk to the critical infrastructure pieces all over the world. Next slide, please. Currently, we have 34 members in our coalition, and it is across the various geographies, from the developed countries to the developing countries, from the small island developing countries, from the landlocked countries, high mountain regions, and so forth, where we are specifically focusing on the aspect of climate and disaster risk with respect to the physical risk of these critical infrastructures such as power, telecommunication, transportation, and health. Sure. So that's it. And sorry. Yeah, so as I think I don't need to tell this message to the larger audience over here, the increased frequency and severity and impact of physical events, and which has shown the growing concern which is facing our energy production, distribution, and critical infrastructure all over the world. As a quick overview, what an impact of disaster happens on a society, on a country, and on its economy. For example, Cyclone Fani in 2019 in Odisha, which had almost $9 billion of economic impact, and on distribution and transmission utility alone, the impact was almost $1.2 billion. And Cyclone Winston, Fiji, 2017, almost $1.3 billion of damage, which is almost 30% of its GDP. Just imagine the same amount of money they could have been invested in school, healthcare, other SDGs initiatives for their small island countries, which they can do that. Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, 2017, almost $91 billion. And in fact, US is not also sort of away from this type of disaster. Superstorm Sandy in USA, economic impact of $65 billion. And this will get worse. Annual economic loss in Pacific SIDS alone cost almost 5% of its GDP, combined GDP annually. Just imagine the small country with the small GDP that they have, the 5% of it gets impacted just because of the disasters. And there is a future projection of more than 40% increase in number of disasters between 2015 and 30 within the Sendai framework, which is for the disaster risk reduction. Economic impact, again, private sector losses is close to $82 billion. Household losses, which is $2.3 to $190 billion, which Killian and Ravi sir have just spoken about, the overall economic and societal losses and the costs that it has over the generations. Next slide, please. I think somehow this isn't working for me. Just So what we are looking at and how to ensure resilience. I think Killian has specifically, gone a little deep dive into how to build a resilient power infrastructure, but in terms of the broad bullet point, what are dynamic trends? Risks are driving system designs and adaptation in a very wrapped and critical ways. It's very confusing sometimes. Interaction across multi-jurisdictional and sub-systems are very critical. So interdependency of different infrastructure systems are very important. Power is very critical for transportation. As we move forward towards electrification of transportation, it will become more critical. Health and industries and economy, I think I don't need to sort of talk more about it. And we need to overcome these system vulnerabilities, supply chain vulnerabilities, resource vulnerabilities, and market vulnerabilities, and integrating equity considerations, which requires new questions, linkages, and supports. And what things you should be considering while designing such systems, and this is for the utility, is where is my network is at the greatest risk. Because you can't make everything critical, because it costs, and at the end you have to go to regulator and you have to face them. So where is my network is at the greatest risk? What infrastructure should be prioritized for hardening? That's very important. How much downtime can be expected for the critical infrastructure? Benchmarking downtime is very important for utility in order to further improve their services. How to conduct criticality analysis, that's very important. And REL has a very, very sort of a good guidebook on that, and I would request everyone to go through that and for utility in order to sort of take it themselves, the whole ownership about resilient infrastructure, is to target invest where it matters most and how it should be invested. And what changes call for the shifting perspective in order to broaden our perspective. So that's something which a utility need to consider while sort of looking at the resilience of their own systems, because at the end it costs. And at the end, because it's sort of a very regulated and tightly regulated entity, we need to justify the cost to our regulators, to our consumers, and to other countries. Sorry. So there's a case study which I just wanted to talk about, because NREL has already spoken deep about what it takes to build a resilient infrastructure and why it's important. So there's a case study about Cyclone Fani. It's in the eastern coast of India. Most of us are familiar, which is prone to cyclone years after years after years, and which has a massive impact and damages on the entire T&D infrastructure. So in 2019, as I told, the overall economic impact was close to 9 billion. Power sector infrastructure was approximately 1.2 billion. And just look at the numbers. Transmission systems, 116 towers, 2 grids, and 250 kilometers of lines were damaged. Distribution, I think it was even worse. And we are at distribution utility meet. I think we should look at these numbers and try to sort of internalize this whole aspect of how critical this is. More than 2.2 lakhs, which is more than 200,000 utility poles were damaged. More than 100,000, 1.1 lakh kilometers of lines were damaged, and more than 12,000 transformers were damaged, and which had overall impact of 4.6 million electricity consumers, and in some part, the electricity took to restore almost a lot of time. So what we did in Odisha, so we did a comprehensive study, and taking leaf out of the book of NREL, so it was about we have divided the study in 3 components, component 1, 2, and 3. The component 1 looked at the disaster preparedness and management of the existing infrastructure. Component 2 looked at the risk mapping and improvement of the infrastructure, where specifically, which is very critical, we identified T&D infrastructure across the coast of Odisha for 450 kilometers, from 0 to 60 kilometers to the coast, and we have mapped entire T&D infrastructure till 11 kV, and we tried to sort of look at how critical they are, and how vulnerable they are, and how should we prioritize in terms of the investment. And we looked at the code standards and designs, which are very important. We looked at the technology innovations which are needed to boost the resilience of the infrastructure. And the third component is looking at the risk-based governance, because again, it's a regulated entity, how to finance the resilient infrastructure build-up, financing resilience and adaptation, and capacity mapping and development. Then what are basically the key takeaways and recommendations for us at today's August presence? We should strengthen the infra governance. We should look at improved outcomes, create comprehensive roadmaps for within the utility, integrate resilience in every aspect of the O&M, tools to support regulations and legislations. Risk assessment is very important. Identify and manage risk. These are very important. Update and introduce regulatory tools, codes, and standards. This is very important. For example, in terms of Odisha, we realized that wind zone map were not upgraded, wind zone map were not integrated, so the building standards and codes were not upgraded. So building standard codes were not upgraded. This meant that the entire buildup of T&D infrastructure that has happened, it's not up to the 200 or 250 kilometers of the wind speed or gust speed that is happening. So that's very important. And so these agencies need to co-work together. Cross collaboration is very important, and we have seen till now it's like herding cats. So we need to have figure out the better way to deal with and adapt whole of the systems approach and align outcomes with the regulators, utilities, and owners. And the third is integrate disaster and climate risk, equitable access to the standards and hazard map and risk data. And fourth is incorporate of resilience risk into the infrastructure investment, educate financing, and develop tools to but the third point is quite important, develop tools to justify resilience economic benefit that outweighs its cost. This is very important because at the end we have to go to the regulator to justify the cost, because at the end it gets reflected to the tariff. And in the country which is very sensitive to the tariff, we need to be really mindful of that. And then the capacity building is very important of the utilities, of the regulators, and entire ecosystems in order to develop more better power system sector in the country. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. In fact, we have Mr. Rastogi further down in the queue who lives and breathes this. So he would probably talk a little bit more, I think. Next, we have Mr. R.R. Mehta, good friend, colleague from yesteryears. So we'll hear what he has to say.
You uploaded, please?
Yeah, it's just loaded.
I don't see it here. Okay, I can see it here. Can I see on the screen? It's not here? Maybe there's some emphasis, so, okay. All right, okay.
He's seeing whether you're 20/20 on eyesight from this far.
I don't see anything.
But you should be able to do an F4, right? You should do an F4 on the screen. So that he can see both. Do an F4.
I'll use this otherwise. But this will change the slides.
This
Or
will
we
change
cannot.
that.
Okay, I can use this, no problem. Where is that? I sent the mail. Okay, forget it. I think I'll have to live with what we have. And sorry about this eating of the time.
Closer where you sit and then you look at that screen.
I think that would be better. I use a mic rather than,
The less of the stress.
Good afternoon, everybody. Lot has been talked about climate change and disaster, but there is a very thin line between the climate change and disaster.
Just giving you a hard time.
So sorry, sir.
Oh, I use this?
Yeah.
Down? No. It's okay now. It's not coming there. It's not in sync. Oh, now it's there. Okay. Okay, I think we're okay. So I have to press the down one, right? Yeah. Okay. I was talking about climate change and disaster. There is very thin line between the two. For the impact, for the manageability of the same, and that's what I'm trying to explain in this. I'm a grassroots level thought processor, so that's how I have thought that it is much more important to reflect that. Now, if you look at this, what is a climate? Climate is a weather condition on a specific area for a certain period. And the climate controls all the developments which are explained here, growth of plants, animal behavior, other organisms, and interactivity of the physical environment. Environment is a local topography, be it mountains, deserts, urban, rural, etc., etc. Now, these are the fundamental differences between the three of these issues which keep overlapping each other as we go forward. Now, if we go to our ancestral scriptures, the Rig Veda had defined that there are 5 elements which manage the ecosystem of the world. And these were earth, air, water, temperature, and sky. And it makes a very pertinent observation that it has maintained the entire life system on earth are based on harmonious functioning of these 5 elements. Very, very important, harmonious functioning of these 5 elements. And they change as the topography changes or as the need changes. Then we go down to the next part. It says the energies and benefits derived proportionately from these 5 elements will only sustain life. Any disproportionate exploitation of these energies resulting in an imbalance will cause disaster. I'm going to try and do a little more emphasis on this issue later. Now, what is a disaster? I'll just leave it for the first para. A disaster is a serious problem occurring over a period of time, a problem occurring over a period of time that causes widespread human, material, economic, or environmental loss which exceeds the ability of the affected community or society to cope using its own resources. Now, mind you, it's a problem occurring over a period of time, not corrected during the period of time, which causes this. Now, if you look, what is the main element? It's the heat or temperature is a predominant element in climate which cause disaster. Now, if you look at the electricity value chain, which is GTD, we have conversion of energy which generates heat or temperature rise. We convert chemical energy to mechanical energy. That means coal into mechanical energy, then to electrical energy, and then again converts into mechanical energy when the consumer uses it. Now, what are the mitigations which have happened in recent past, in last say a decade? The process of chemical energy to mechanical energy is being substituted by windmills for creating electrical energy. Process from chemical energy to mechanical to electrical energy is being substituted by solar panels for creating electrical energy. So these are the mitigation factors which help in reducing the impact on the climate. Now, the characteristic of disaster is that it is unpredictable on its actual impact. We have all the informations, but actual impact is always having unpredictable nature. And therefore, while climate change is managed through various steps taken as we go forward, some of which have been elaborated here, however, disaster will predominantly be always reactive management. Therefore, the emphasis for disaster management has to be creating resource availability to the extent can be envisaged for restoration of disruption. There will generally be a gap between the resource available and resource required when the disaster happens. Now, the consumer will have a lesser impact if there is an efficient management of risks likely to happen from disaster by a utility, but the consumer will be affected more if there is an inefficiency in the utility for the same. So what are the primary takeaways? Primarily, origination of condition for disaster not contributed by DISCOM. We are the sufferers, if I may say so. We are not the great contributors to the disasters. Limited proactive action by DISCOMs. Resource planning preparedness, essential element for reactive response. Now, I come to it that, okay, if you look at the distribution as a whole, countrywide, there is a huge amount of resources available, but they're not being used effectively to support one another. You know, if there is a problem in Odisha, do we look at other states to support the system by sending people or by sending resources? We don't have a comprehensive process by which it can be done. And we have had an experience in 2005, we had a cloudburst in Mumbai, and we had to, at that time, initiate the process of getting support from our Delhi team, support from MSEDCL and other companies. But then we learned that lesson, and in next time onwards, we created a disaster management manual whereby in advance letters were sent to these utilities who support us our requirement. Now, I'm putting a little one step ahead of it. When there's a disaster in the country, NDRF gets activated. What is NDRF? NDRF is a collective resource made available in a concentrated manner to be deployed anywhere we require. Now, why can't we have something of that kind in distribution system? There's no need to put those resources separate as NDRF does because the requirement is different. These resources can be made available when required through a coordinated effort of 2 or 3 or 4 centers, so that if anything happens in one part of the country, the other parts of the country, to the possible they can support, can rise to the occasion and help it. So detailed SOP can be prepared, and I think ISGF or people like them can take initiative that how do we bring on data of what resources are available and what are the nearest resources, how can we use those resources to manage the post-effect of the disasters. Now that's about it. I've gone to the grassroots level. Other people will talk about the climate change management and those kind of things. So I hope it is meaningful for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. By the way, this part of the seat of the Advait in the Rig Veda there's a small place just on the other side of the Cochin airport where Shankaracharya also elucidates it. So for those of you who are outside the state, you may wish to even consider going and paying a visit there. It's very interesting that Advait was here. Okay, so we next move to Ms. Goel. Ms. Goel, the floor is yours. Oh, you're going to speak from there, or you have? Okay, good. And please, 5 minutes if you can. Thanks.
So good afternoon, everybody. Extremely thankful to ISGF for creating this platform and mainstreaming disaster and climate readiness and giving them an independent session, allocating an independent session to discuss this, and scheduling this session before lunch, before everybody is sleepy and ready to go back home and tired. So, of course, we understand that disasters are going to be hitting us more frequently with greater intensity, and climate and global warming is going to be increasing that. So, the writing is there on the wall to see. We also need, I think that's coming out in the conversation, that India is a highly climate vulnerable and a disaster vulnerable geography. India has actually been ranked 7th on the climate risk index. For reasons of geography, for reasons of the fact that our economy is largely dependent on agriculture, which is climate vulnerable or climate dependent. But also because we are a land of the poor, and poverty is also increases vulnerability and reduces resilience. India is also at a stage where it is taking off on infrastructure development. Now, infrastructure could be power, it could be related to transport, etc. So the scale at which disaster resilience needs to be built into infrastructure, power infrastructure as well, is huge. And therefore the challenge, but I think therefore the opportunity also, because we are building infrastructure ground up. So we have the opportunity now to bake in disaster resilience into our infrastructure planning, designing, siting of infrastructure as well. And I think that's something that a lot of you out here in the audience would already be thinking about, but this is really something that we need to bring to the forefront. So I would say that let's look at disaster and climate preparedness not as a reaction to a disaster, but let's look at it from a proactive point of view. How do we bake in resilience into our planning, into our siting, into our design of infrastructure? And I think that's going to be an interesting piece going forward. A lot of you out here are experts on the technology piece. I would just like to bring another perspective out here, that how about we talk about, and clearly, and talk about the elephant in the room, which is financing for the resilient features that we need to bring in, from proactive side as well as from reactive side. So how do we bring in greater disaster preparedness into our financial planning so that we are better prepared, A, to mitigate the disasters, and B, to react and respond effectively and in a timely manner once the disaster strikes. The point that I would like to make out here is that so far, our response to disasters has been post facto. I mean, once a disaster strikes, we move in, we start our relief work, we start our restoration work. And invariably, this post facto response works out to be much more expensive on the people who've suffered from the disaster, on the utilities, and the economy as a whole. So can we now acquire a lens where we actually look at developing and devising creative financial instruments that will be better, that will actually put aside pools of finance which can be available at just a call's away in the case a disaster strikes. So there are some examples in the country, in the world, where creative financial instruments have been devised, which India can increasingly think about, which will create pools of finance which are available with the government, with insurance agencies, etc., which can be dipped into in the case a disaster strikes. So I would like to give the example of 3 such pools and leave you with these thoughts. Of course, this is just the start of this whole engagement. A lot more creativity can come in, and as the financial systems in our country are getting stronger and more flexible and diverse, I think a lot of creativity will come in, will get built in as we go forward. So there is this one concept of national risk pooling. So can we pool risk across the geography, across assets, which will allow the insurance premiums to come down for all vulnerable utilities? Now what that does is, A, we are able to onboard more utilities to actually get insured. B, we are able to also negotiate better reinsurance rates. Because the pool is so large, we are able to get better reinsurance rates, so that benefit then we can pass on in the form of lower premiums to utilities or to the agencies or individuals that are getting insured. So it helps to create a virtuous loop. So let's think about creating larger national insurance pools, and that those pools can then be leveraged to get better insurance rates and win-wins for all stakeholders. The other thing that we could potentially consider is what we call contingency funds. Now these contingency funds basically involve parking a certain corpus which, basis some predetermined triggers, can be activated. So it's not as though the government is, or an insurer, or an agency, or a utility is running helter-skelter for funding when a disaster has struck. It is this fund is available, it has already been parked. At the time a disaster strikes, they can dip into this fund at the shortest possible notice. And the World Bank Group has actually evolved some very interesting matrix whereby certain predetermined triggers can actually activate that fund. So they actually don't assess the damage and make a payout basis the damage. They allow for the payout to be made just after the event has triggered, the event has happened. And this can be audited by an external third-party agency, and it allows for easy and fast-tracked access and disbursement of funds. The other thing, so there has been what we call catastrophe contingency fund, or what they call catastrophe deferred drawdown option, CAT DDO. This is something you may also want to read on as you, if you like to explore this. I would be happy to talk about this offline. There is also a concept of catastrophe bonds, what we call CAT bonds. Now what these bonds allow is, they allow us to pass the risk of these disasters, of financing these disasters, funding the restoration and relief work of these disasters to the private sector, from the public sector to the private sector. Now this can potentially again be a win-win. So these bonds are created by an intermediary agency, which could be an insurer, it could be a credible agency like a World Bank, and these bonds are then floated to purchasers who have a different risk appetite, or a higher risk appetite, or who have a diversified risk appetite. So they are ready to pay. So the way it would work is that these bonds would be sold. The corpus collected from the sale of those bonds would again be parked into a corpus. Funds from the corpus can be released when a predetermined trigger is activated for specific activities which are already predetermined. The buyer of this bond gets a higher premium. The government or the insurance agency gets access to these funds just as the event triggers the access to these bonds. So in some ways, the payout from the government side is fixed because it's a fixed interest rate, the CAT bond interest rate. So the government can actually do better fiscal planning because they know exactly what kind of payout they are obliged to make for this insurance. The purchaser of the bond is getting a higher risk premium or a higher premium on their bond. Whatever amount of fund is utilized, typically these bonds are floated for very short durations, 1 to 5 years, because we want to reduce the risk perception of these bonds. And what happens is that the bonds, the money that is utilized in case an event happens, is utilized, and whatever is left behind is handed over back to the purchaser when the bond period expires. So the advantage of these kind of innovative, creative instruments could be that A, they enable access to rapid, cost-effective, and well-targeted finance. They reduce the risk of destabilizing public finances, an important consideration, especially for public agencies, for governments. They reduce the cost of contingency finance. And the cost is fixed, it is upfront, hence it removes the uncertainties leading to better fiscal planning. But I think most significantly, these kind of approaches also inculcates a culture of investments in risk reduction. I think that culture increasingly needs to be built into our conversations, especially in conversations around infrastructure development, like the power infrastructure development. So thank you so much.
Battery is low. Anyway, thank you, ma'am, for bringing in the financial aspect. There's just one aspect that in the past has not worked, and you may want to imbibe it in your program. I think it's very interesting. At the end, it has to go to a physical match after the financial match. For example, if you look at the Enron problem, the Texas outages, in the end, people were looking for goods to substitute what they lost, and the financial agencies were not able to make that good. So in the end, the financial risk mitigation was sort of on the paper, if you will. So when you articulate this more, I think it's very interesting what you mentioned. But ensure that at the back end, there are people ready with diesel generators, all those kind of things, as opposed to just a financial payout instrument. So thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So the next we have is Mr. Rastogi. Mr. Rastogi, you are on, and your 5-minute time as well, please.
So good afternoon, everyone. I am R.K. Rastogi, and I am from TPCODL, that is TPCentralOdisha.com. So today's topic of disaster management and building resiliency in the network is quite relevant from Odisha point of view, because every year we have been experiencing cyclones or other adverse conditions like tropical storms, thunderstorm and lightning. So I'll be just giving a perspective from utility side. So basically what we have observed that in last decade or so, the frequency of cyclones have increased, and every year, if not once, that there are 2 times also when cyclones are actually making the landfall and affecting the network. So as part of TPCODL, we had carried out a study on the basis of historical data, various studies carried out before, and done some design analysis also, and ultimately mapped our entire geography in 3 wind zones basically. So, and what came out of the study was that 0 to 60 kilometer is very high intensity wind zone, in which the wind speed is expected to go up to 300 kilometer per hour. Then 60 to 100 kilometer, the high intensity wind zone, where we are expecting that wind speed can go up to 250 kilometer per hour, and moderate. So where the wind we are expecting, so 140 to 200 kilometer. Actually, this study helps us out in planning our future investment. So, and to be ensured that there is resiliency into the network. So if we look at from network condition point of view, after carrying out this study, what we find out that the existing network is not resilient enough to withstand with this wind speed. There are substations in the low cost area where there is a risk of flooding. Then there are distribution transformer substation, again those are pole mounted substation who are not capable enough to withstand this wind speed. And there is, whenever there is a event, the disaster event occurs, there is a massive loss to the utility in terms of, massive loss and challenge to the utility in terms of building the infrastructure. Huge fund requirement are there, and when thousands of people are working in multiple locations, to ensuring quality and safety also becomes a challenge. So the option could be whether to go with the resilient network and such a robust network which can create least, which can have a least damage, then allow damage to some extent and restore system as early as possible. And there is a cost associated with each option, and that would be a different approach. So the approach what we have taken so all new infrastructure in first 20 kilometers, all our future investment, so that we will be going with the resilient network, and we will be retrofitting and re-strengthening the network in case of 20 to 60 kilometers with more resilient, bringing in more resiliency in the network. In urban area, wherever techno-commercial proposal is possible, we will have to go for underground cabling. Then instead of outdoor substation, so we will be going with the indoor substation and splitting larger network section to the smaller one for faster restoration. And we are maintaining proper stock for the mobile substations also, so that in case of any event, the power can be restored quickly. In case of flood, we are ensuring that wherever the new installation is to be done, it has to be above the high flood level, and whatever distribution transformers are there, so we will be getting away with the pole mounted substations and going to the plinth mounted one. So we have carried out a design study with TC, and we came out in developing a rebar lacing pole. So this rebar lacing pole we are using in our 0 to 20 kilometer network to bring in resiliency. So it is less in weight. It can withstand up to 300 km per hour wind speed. It has been type tested by CPRI, and its design is very simple. So it has got a stub type foundation where the stub is embedded into the foundation, and through nut bolt arrangement the entire tower can be constructed. And further, in case of cross arm, the composite insulated cross arm along with this RLP pole further ensures more resilience and reliability into the network. We are also in the process of developing an in-house dashboard for weather portal, where we are collecting data from several weather stations and integrating it with the radar and satellite data, so that if you can get advanced information about the cyclone or the tropic storms. So it would be very beneficial. It is under development. Still we are testing this. And as far as collaboration and resource sharing is concerned, so let me tell you, in managing disaster, Odisha is supposed to be one of the best states in the country. So in bringing in resiliency into the network, thousands of crores of investment has been done by the Odisha government, either through the Odisha Distribution System Strengthening Scheme or through State Disaster Management Fund. So which has helped us out in bringing some resiliency in the network. And it is evident from the fact that in last 5 years, we have experienced like Amphan, Yas, Jawad, and damage to the network was of lesser extent in comparison to the earlier one. So, and as part of TPCODL also, we have our own disaster management cell, in which during getting an information, we activate the alert and form various committees. So there is a core assessment committee, disaster assessment committee, emergency support team. Then we have a centralized control room and decentralized control room also. And there is a defined information flow so that everybody is aware of that what all is happening and if any kind of support is required. So emergency restoration system on standby is also kept. There are emergency locational stores where we ensure that a minimum stock on inventory, either in terms of pole, cables, conductor, is readily available all the time. An early warning system of weather station, this I discussed. In the meantime, if we are able to succeed getting this information, it can be integrated with our SCADA system to build upon more use cases. And satellite phones are also kept to the critical location. So the takeaway I have already discussed, that in first 20 kilometers we will be going on with the resilient network in all our new investment. And in case of 20 to 70 kilometers, there will be retrofitting and system strengthening, bringing in more resiliency. For flood-prone area, we will ensure that everything is kept above high flood level. And urban and semi-urban area, we will be going with underground cable wherever it is techno-commercial possibilities there. Thank you. I hope I am able to.
Change the batteries on it. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, you know what, in very many ways what you articulated today perhaps has got some wider knowledge to be shared amongst other utilities as well, having been prone to the cyclone issues that Odisha did. So maybe, Reji, you may want to take a little note and we can do another seminar just on the 3 or 5 areas that he articulated. ISUW. Yes, ISUW, yes. So thank you for that. So next we have Mr. Ashutosh Sharma. Your 5 minutes is up.
Thank you. I'll be talking because as you go behind, you are left with very little to speak on because we have a very eminent speakers before. But the topic is so wide, it has no end. You can just keep on adding to it. And if I ask you, you all are from the distribution utilities, who always remains in your mind? In the last session, we have been hearing, I think, customer word we heard more than 100 times. There is one more C you have to take care, and which is also bothering you, is climate. As you heard, cyclones are coming more in deserts, cloud flooding, cloud burst. So if I go forward on my talk, possibly I need to skip few more slides to match the time and what has been covered by the earlier speakers. Okay, you know it is official how the temperature rise has happened in last many years. Already we are at 1 degree rise, and each temperature rise has an effect. Who is creating this temperature rise? Is it distribution utilities or the electricity? It is the cause which is caused by the electricity only. Because we need electricity, we burn fuel, and we create temperature. So this 1 degree has a lot of impact. If you think of, we are all engineers, 3 degree rise of a copper will increase to losses by how much? 1%, which is huge. Just think of. And if you see India, India is highly impacted. India is heating up into summer and getting cooler in winter. You can see on the graph. I don't want to go in more detail. But what is needed? I'll just refer, I come from DNV. DNV is basically an independent consultant, and we produce an energy transition outlook, and every year we release it. So we spend a lot on the research on this, and the outcome is, even if we meet the Paris Agreement, and ETO forecast is saying that most likely we are heading up to 2.2 degree rise by the end of century, if everything goes as we are doing, or even if we go to net zero, we'll still reach 1.5 degree rise, which is going to affect a lot. We don't know how the environment is going to behave, how the ecological, as we have touched upon the 5 tattvas, if the imbalance is happening, how it is going to affect it. So I will talk on one more important thing, which is emissions. 70% of the greenhouse effect is coming from the energy sector, don't forget it. So we have a very important role to play on this part. I will not touch upon impact and measures because of the time limitation. There will be increase of air temperature, there is an increase in precipitation. What has happened recently? Or there will be floods are going to increase. Even in Rajasthan you can see cloud busting. Floods are happening in a desert. And what has happened recently? Let us not forget it. You might have heard the incident of Glacier Lake outburst in Sikkim. Complete hydel power station has been wiped off. I don't want to play this video. Possibly you might have heard being in India. I'll just pass on. I want to pass on the key message which is coming out of it. I will not talk on the measures. There is a lot of ISGF brochure is also put at so many measures. But is it a remedy? There has been some proposals which has been given, establish a national forum or national like NDRF concept. So those are basically to deal with it. But I just refer, cyclones are very prone because I come from Dubai, so it is very, very much also there. In Oman, they are also getting hit very much on the cyclones. Even UAE is getting affected. But what are the main thing is, this is disruption. And disruption risk is not only because of cyclone. There was a very, Mr. Mehta mentioned about environment, change in environment, change in temperature. There is also something changing. What is? The behavior of organisms is changing. So let us talk about the disruption risk management, not just disaster management. What is the disruption risk? We recently had COVID. How we know that no new more viruses are coming as the temperature is changing, which also affects everyone. It also affects the distribution utilities. So there is a broad thinking needed on the disruption risk management. So for the challenges for distribution utilities is, there is a typical behavior of disruptions. So we need to establish a disruption risk management system in utilities. So we have to think of whether we do at one distribution utility, we grow it to the major distribution utilities and go at a national level to deal with disruption risk management. So you have to establish, you must be doing DSM, so many other things, but there is a very much need to also look for disruption risk asset management. So that is my key. And what is needed for that is, you really need to be having very innovative. You have to learn out of each incident, each event, and work it out because as we are planning something, he is also planning something. He keeps on increasing. You have one cyclone, now you design for 220 kilometer per second per mile speed, wind speed. You design your assets for that, but there is no limit of it. So we have to address the issue, and we also need to address how to meet out of these calamities. So that is what, so need is to establish innovative solutions, learn out of each incident, make a joint efforts at a national level or an international and a global level, so that we can address this key issue which is hindering us. And it is not only us, we should also think about the generation coming, our kids, because we are talking, everything is available, we are talking about the century end, but who is getting affected more? So innovative solution is the key to it. We can look for the financial risk management, we can look into the recovery management, but there is a need for disruption risk management system at distribution utilities, and there should be a key to the continuity of a business. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know why. Change the Yeah, thank you very much for introducing the word disruption, which I think is a key element. At one time, Reggie and I were also talking about this, I think last year, because the social impact itself of power is like 40 times sometimes the cost of power. So it becomes a very natural element to introduce it, so thank you very much for that. Correct. In fact, anyway, Reggie is taking copious notes there, so yeah. So last but certainly not the least, we have Ms. Sagar. So 5 minutes is your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Vaishali Sagar. I'm glad I'm the one between you and your lunch, but I hope I'll keep it short so that you get the key messages. And thank you so much, Ashutosh ji, for putting the right word out there, which I'm going to continue in terms of innovative solutions. We're talking more about sustainability through cloud. I'm from AWS. I handle the Startups Charter and Sustainability Charter for India, where we see how you don't really have to build something from a solution perspective if you really want to innovate. You can always partner, acquire, or buy. I see many of you who are distribution utilities and companies and organizations in the room who've already done that, and I think that's a clear exhibition that we have, which showcases that we've partnered and acquired quite a lot of tools, technologies, and services. With that, I'd want to quickly give you a little story in this. And I think this is the van that's every parent's nightmare. I'm not sure how many of you were told during childhood, do not get into someone's cab or someone's car that you don't know, and definitely do not take any candies from them. I'm not sure if you've given this message to anyone. If I could get a quick show of hands, if you mentioned this to your kids or anyone in your family. Okay, thank you for the show of hands. I'm assuming the others also mentioned it in various formats. But what if I told you, here's the car. Would you let your respective kid or family member to get in? Can I get a quick show of hands on how confident that you are that you could get your family member get into this? Awesome, I see a slight hindrance there. But I think with respect to this, what's really changed? What do you think has changed from the van? Any quick shout out that you would want to give? Sorry? Taxi, okay. Branding. Trust, thank you so much. Cloud, thank you so much for that. But not really talking about cloud here, but what you really see here is Uber. And I think that's exactly what's the business model of Uber is. It's literally telling you to install the app on your phone. You're telling them where you're going. You're telling them whom you're going with and where do you live as well. And trust me, there are times for the best of customer experience that they offer, they'll maybe offer you a free candy as well. and a bottle of water, maybe in case if they really want to give you a top-notch customer experience. And we don't call it so much as taxi anymore. We call it Uber, Ola. I'm sure many of us, when we're coming from the airport to hotel and hotel to other tourist destination, we're all picking up these respective startups that are really making a lot of difference as we see right now. And we don't really call them theaters anymore. What do we call them right now? Any platforms that you'd want to call out? I'm sure many of you must be browsing if you're really bored right now in the hall. Anything that you watch as a platform that you'd want to call out instead of going to a theater? Netflix? OTTs? I'm guessing you're giving OTT examples, right? Thank you so much. So we don't call them theaters anymore. We call them Netflix, Prime, Hotstar, and that's how it rolls. We don't call them hotels anymore. We call them Airbnbs. We don't call them banks anymore. We call them Paytm. That's what startups are here for. That's really changing the game in terms of not just the business model, but also building trust, which you never had when you saw the free candy van. Imagine how much of a positioning of a particular brand and startup that's really changing your perception. How they're really working in terms of building on your business models that are really changing the way in which things are currently considered. And an open secret that I'd want to call out right now, all of these respective apps or applications that you have leveraged, if you've experienced one of this, that means you've experienced AWS. AWS, I mean Amazon Web Services. And that's the true power that we'd want to talk about in terms of not just with respect to the work that we're doing across sectors, but also in terms of empowering startups and asking them to be part of the larger portfolio of the work that we're doing and solving for the larger sector of public sector or with respect to distribution utilities that we're working across with. And I'd want to call out also the quick commitment from Amazon that we've made in terms of ensuring we improve the global climate change and not really contribute to the climate change that's really going on. We've invested in renewable energy, shipment zero, net zero carbon, electric delivery vehicles. I'm sure that you would see the 10 lakh vehicles that we've got in India are electric right now in terms of most of your deliveries. There's also Climate Pledge Fund, and there's also an Amazon sustainability report that's published every year to talk about what's Amazon contribution to the climate. Keeping this aside, no, I'm good. Yeah, thanks. Keeping this aside, I'd want to maybe talk through some challenges that I think we all heard through in various formats, but I'd want to maybe pick up carbon accounting as one of the quick pieces. In terms of what are the various challenges that we are all understanding from this respective phenomenon of disaster management and resilience with respect to climate. Most of them are associated or related or relevant to utilities, where we speak about siloed data source, where the data resides in disparate sources. Data is manually captured in Excels, in spreadsheets, lacking data integrity and auditability. There's also resource burden. We speak of expensive and time-consuming to correlating the silos and deriving insights out of it. There's inconsistent data quality and reliability. Nearly 90% of companies that are not accounting for Scope 3 emissions comprehensively due to resource burden of data capture. I'm sure many of you are going through these challenges as we speak as well. And it's also estimated that there are 25 to 30% uncertainty in emissions reported due to errors in measurement data. And of course, there are limited insights because there's also inconsistent data. And that's exactly what I thought I'll bring some your eyes and perspective onto. And what we do at Amazon is really putting in through a bunch of things that will really help you in terms of pushing the conversations forward and contributing from a services point of view, from a solutions point of view. The best part is there are partners, there are startups, there are organizations that are building from an independent software vendors that we've kind of worked across with and partnered with. And these are experience builders, and these are really the solutions that are built off the shelf that could be helping you automate your let's say, energy efficiency in AWS infrastructure. There's also carbon accounting. There's a tool that helps you understand and measure the carbon footprint that's being done by your respective organization and respective utility. There's also sustainability insights framework that provides a well-architected backbone for the web application. It's basically a foundation to accelerate the entire design and the implementation of customers' own application to automate their entire carbon footprint tracking as well. And the most important, I think, example is also that we have with utilities. Sorry. Can you go back? Let me change, that's okay. Sorry. And one of the examples that I had is around utility bill processing, and I think we've got some partners who've also implemented and are partnering with us on AWS. Basically, this is a guidance that's showing how to derive sustainability insights from utility bills using emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And customers of these public utilities can convert their invoices into structured data, automating the extraction of key data points from any utility's invoice, normalizing the data across various types of utilities and gaining insights about where they're generating the highest emissions. So that's where one of the examples that we could give that we're trying to solve for utilities. And one other quick data point from a research being done by 451 Research Organization. In terms of moving your computer workloads from on-premises to cloud, you can actually improve the energy efficiency for companies in Asia Pacific region, the region that we are based out of, and reduce the carbon footprint for more than 78%. I repeat, more than 78%. There's also a sustainability pillar that's added to our well-architected framework in terms of understanding how do you consistently measure and architect against sustainability best practices so that we do the job for you and you really work on your respective problem statements that you have in your respective utilities. And a quick snapshot of SDGs that we all heard of, and I think I'm surprised on how we didn't really speak through SDGs in this panel, but I think with respect to sustainable development goals that we have in India, and one of the SDG 7 that we are all contributing to, affordable and clean energy, here are a few solutions that we have partnered with across India and are trying to support, and these are really plug-and-play solutions. What we really would want to showcase here is how we have these solutions that are readily built. You just have to plug into these respective solutions and services and understand which one retrofits into your respective utility or your organization. Glad to say that there are a few startups outside in the exhibition like ChargeMod and Crystal Kimball as we speak, who are also working with us in this particular aspect. And of course, contributing to the larger SDG of clean water, sanitation, life on land, and climate action. So we really, I think, want to give away a message that you'd want to see how give technology a chance. I'm not really sure if that's really missing the bus if you miss technology in this entire conversation, but we'd like to see how we could interact more and explore more collaborations. We're outside in the exhibition area at AWS booth, and we'd love to see how we could showcase and explore more possibilities. Looking forward to have you all there. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and really thank ISGF for us. And thank you so much, Ravi Garu.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think another very interesting aspect to this is carbon accounting. I think that was what sort of stood out. And then, of course, by the way, she's got more funds to give you for your eco bonds as well. So you may source AWS for the bond side. But I think it's very interesting, right? To be able to take that aspect of carbon accounting and then say, okay, who is the best? Maybe we should have a competition amongst all the distribution utilities as to who is greener than the others, right? Because they serve the customers. That's one takeaway that I had. The second on the server part has been around, but you'd have to work with the government because the government is going in the opposite direction. They want more and more servers nationally for data security reasons, and therefore this issue of taking it to Iceland, which is where you want to take it, may be counter, but you may have to work that with the government. So that's the second one. So we are still almost on time. I would like to just maybe raise it to 1 or 2 questions, any burning questions to the panel, and then we'll wrap it up. Going 1, going 2, going 3. So lunch is more important than the panel. I get it. Okay. So thank you very much. All this, you can see this is a very large subject. We are going to make a beginning, and I hope Reji continues this in every session. We need to have something to do with climate, because this has to be heightened to the level in which somebody begins to take very appropriate actions. Otherwise, we are going downhill here without any hope of turning around. So with that, I conclude the session. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause for Mr. Ravi Sitapati for again meticulously finishing the session on time. I would like...
One minute. We'll be doing a 2-day program exclusively on exactly climate readiness and resiliency of electric grid for energy transition. This will be on 21st May and 22nd May 2024 in Istanbul. Please mark your calendar.
Thank you, sir. I would like to make an important announcement before we go into the felicitation. It's regarding the cruise dinner today. From 7:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m., buses will depart from Le Méridien Convention Center at 6:30 p.m. Ships will leave for the Marine Drive jetty, which is next to High Court Water Metro. Initially, we had contracted a larger ship that could carry 250 people. Unfortunately, that ship's repair is under repair, and inspection couldn't be completed as scheduled. Hence, we have hired 2 ships, one with the capacity of 140 and another with the capacity of 100. So ISGF and the KSEB team has distributed the 240 guests into the 2 ships. Both ships will go parallelly and will have the same food, drinks, and entertainment programs. The cruise tickets with each person's names will be available at the registration counter from 3 p.m. today onwards. Please collect your tickets and cooperate to maintain the schedule. It's a very important announcement. Hope all of you have received it. And if your friends have missed out, please let them know. I would like to do the felicitation, and to do the same, I would call Raji sir onto the stage. Could we first definitely felicitate the most and my favorite moderator of the sessions, Mr. Ravi Sitapati. Yes, it is him, ISGF. Sorry?
I said I'm just the cruelest moderator, that's all.
No, you are the best to me. With the sounds and with the spice palette. Thank you so much, sir, for doing this for us. Next, we would like to felicitate Mr. Killian McKenna, Senior Research Engineer, National Renewable Energy Laboratory.
And if we should die tonight, we should all die.
Yes, we've been... Thank you so much, sir. I would like to invite Mr. Amit Tripathi, Advisor, Power Sector Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure.
I see fire inside the mountain. I see fire burning the trees. I see fire hollow soul. I see fire.
Thank you, sir. I would like to call upon Mr. R.R. Mehta, former MD, Reliance Infrastructure. Could I invite Saloni Goel, Director Projects and ESG Regulatory Enterprises Limited.
good flame. Calling out, Father, hold fast and we will watch the flames burn over and over.
With the sound, with the taste. Thank you, ma'am. May I invite Mr. Raj Kumar Rastogi, Chief of Operations, TP Central Odisha Distribution Limited. Thank you, sir. May I invite Mr. Ashutosh Sharma, Senior Principal, Consultant and Team Lead, Grid Asset Management and Studies, DNV Simela. Thank you, sir. May I invite the dynamic Vaishali Sagar, Lead Startups and Sustainability Charter, Amazon Web Services. Thank you so much. May I invite all of you to the front of the stage for a photo to be clicked. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be summoning back here at 2:30. We have about 25 minutes of a lunch break, but 2:30 we start the session sharp so that we can possibly end all the sessions in time for you to catch your cruise and the entertainment and the dinner afterwards.